Hi, good evening. I'm Lonnie Stonich, the Executive Director of FAN, and I am so excited to welcome you to tonight's conversation between Dan Pink and Adam Grant. Thanks for attending. FAN's a nonprofit organization that presents a high-quality speaker series offered free to the public on a wide variety of topics, including human development, mental health, education, and social justice, among others. We have over 175 videos of past events archived on our website and YouTube channel, so please be sure to explore. And now, introductions. Dan Pink is the author of 7 books, including, maybe 8 now, including The Power of Regret, How Looking Backward Moves Us Forward. It's just released. His other books include the New York Times bestsellers When and A Whole New Mind, as well as the #1 New York Times bestsellers Drive and To Sell is Human. His books have won multiple awards, have been translated into 42 languages, and have sold millions of copies around the world. We had the privilege of hosting Dan for several events in 2018 for the When book tour, and we're grateful to be hosting again. Dan is joined by Adam Grant, the Saul P. Steinberg Professor of Management and Professor of Psychology at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. He is an organizational psychologist and the #1 New York Times bestselling author of 5 books. He hosts Work Life, a chart-topping TED original podcast, and his TED Talks on languishing original thinkers and givers and takers have been viewed more than 30 million times. We first hosted Adam in 2014 for a talk on give and take, and again in 2016 for originals. And I'm going to take 10 more seconds to say a special shout out to Professor Liz Gerber of Northwestern University, who sent me an email 8 years ago telling me about her good friend, Adam Grant, who had a book coming out, Give and Take, and would FAN be interested in hosting? And yes, we were, and here he is. This is a special pairing with 2 of our favorite thought leaders, and now let's listen and learn.
Thanks, Lonnie. It's great for 2 native Midwesterners to be back in Chicago. Dan, happy book birthday.
Thank you. Happy Groundhog Day. As you know, Adam, you might not know this, but I'm actually, I sort of have home field advantage here because I am the son of 2 Chicagoans and a graduate of Northwestern. So these are my people right here.
But I grew up in Michigan, which is closer to Chicago than Ohio is.
Yeah, but I went to a Big Ten university in Cook County. So, and anyway, but it's great to see you. Thank you so much for doing this. I'm so glad to see you and to talk about all these cool ideas.
Well, I'm excited for this too. I think the last time we talked, you were in the middle of writing this book, and we were maybe going back and forth about the content and structure a little bit. Let me just start with something that has been on my mind since the moment I started reading, which is you say that regret is a good thing. Is that true?
Done right, absolutely. Regret clarifies and instructs if we treat it right.
Okay, so given that, if I make you regret asking me to do this interview, I will be helping you.
Unquestionably, you will help me make better future decisions about whom I pick as interlocutors for these kinds of things. So thanks.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, then that's my mission if you choose to accept it.
I accept it.
So Dan, tell us for starters, why did you write the book? Are you somebody who's struggled with regret your whole life?
No, I haven't struggled with my regret my whole life, but actually, I think there is a time of life element to this, Adam. There was a catalyst. There's sort of a catalytic moment where I was at the graduation of my elder daughter, whom you know, Sophia, and this is 2019, and I'm having this out of body experience because I can't believe this kid is graduating from college, and then I also can't believe that I have a kid graduating from college because I'm 26, and so my mind is spinning, and I start thinking about my own college experience at Northwestern University, and I started thinking about some of my own regrets, and I wish I had been kinder, I wish I had worked harder, I wish I had taken more risks. And what I found is when I came back to Washington, where I live now and where we've lived for many years, I talked to people about this, just mentioned it kind of sheepishly, they actually leaned in. They didn't recoil, which is not, and you know, as a writer, that's a great sign. And so anyway, to make a long story longer, I put aside another book that I was working on and started looking at some of the academic research on regret. And then about a month after that, I sent my editor, beloved Jake Morrissey, an email saying, hey, Jake, I got some good news and some bad news. The bad news, this book that you think I'm working on, I haven't been working on. The good news is that I got a better idea. Here's a 25-page proposal attached.
Love it. Well, not surprisingly, it's an outstanding book.
Thank you.
I learned so much from it, and I was almost annoyed by how much I learned because I, I'm a psychologist. I read this research for a living. Sometimes I even do it. And as always, you found studies that I hadn't seen. You delivered insights that I didn't have, and you almost made me regret how I've spent part of my career.
Well, thank you. That's what I'm here to serve.
Well, you certainly accomplished that. Let's just, for starters, can you walk us through the case for why regret is so useful and explain why so many people are allergic to it?
Yeah, those questions are twinned in a way, but let's talk about why people are allergic to it, because I think there's a bigger insight there. And something that's something I've realized even since writing the book, and I think it goes straight to, in many ways, to Fan's mission. I think that we have this philosophy of no regrets. We think that we should never look backward, that we're sort of over-indexed on positivity. And when I say we, I really mean Americans more than any other nationality. And that's a really bad idea. It's really bad for us. And the reason for that is that regret is universal. Regret is ubiquitous. And sort of, this is one of those books, Adam, where I actually sort of have a mission here, because I just want to shake people by the lapel if they're wearing, I don't have a lapel, you don't have a lapel, but it's assuming people with lapel. I want to just shake people with lapels and say, stop wearing a jacket. I want to shake people by the lapel and say, listen, this is a really bad idea, because everybody has regrets. Everybody has regrets. Truly, the only people without regrets are 5-year-olds, people with neurodegenerative disorders and brain lesions, and sociopaths. The rest of us have regrets. And the reason for that is because if we treat it right, regrets are useful. They are functional. They instruct us. And so what we're doing in a way here is that we are we've imbibed this philosophy of no regrets and endless positivity. And as a consequence, we're sacrificing a good life. In a way, we're leaving this very potent tool, in the tool shed, and we're not using it. And so I just want to sort of reclaim this idea that regret done right can be a powerful force for progress, for better decision making, for meaning, and all those kinds of things.
That was something I found interesting and a little surprising when I was reflecting on the book. I guess I've always interpreted no regrets a little differently, which is I know enough about the regrets I've had in the past that I want to live so that I'm not going to have regrets in the future. Is that a valid interpretation of the no regrets philosophy, and can I keep it?
Okay, so I think it is, but I don't think it's the only one. So it's sort of like, so I actually think that what's more prominent is this idea of no regrets, saying I don't look back because I'm endlessly focused forward, and I don't want to deal with any kind of negative emotion. Now, you can look forward and say, I want to live my life so I don't have regrets. And when we anticipate our regrets, that can be useful, but even that we don't do correctly, because for a whole host of really, really intriguing reasons. When we anticipate our regret, we sometimes end up trying to maximize every decision, which is a disaster, as you know. We don't necessarily anticipate the right kinds of regrets. And as Dan Gilbert said in one paper, Dan Gilbert, the Harvard psychologist, said in one paper, a lot of times we over anticipate our regrets, so we end up buying emotional insurance we don't need. So, but for me, the big case for no regrets is the big problem with no regrets is that we tend to respond to negative emotions, by trying to bat them away. And that doesn't work for very long. And when we don't bat them away, they end up consuming us. And there's a third way here, that we basically look at negative emotions, especially our most common negative emotion, regret, as a signal, as information, as a knock at the door, as a teacher. Choose your metaphor. But when we deal with regret that way, it's really, really useful.
I tend to think so too. And I wonder if we could bring that to life a little bit by talking about some of your regrets, which you foreshadowed a moment ago, but I'd love to get some specific ones. So maybe I'll give you 3 different categories to react to. The first one is, tell us about a career decision you regret making.
Oh, okay. There are several of them. I mean, so I took a job once on Capitol Hill that was the worst job I've ever had. It was a total disaster, and the reason for it, and I actually let's talk about failure resumes here in a moment because this is like key on my failure resume. Is I took a job there, and I knew the aroma when I walked in there was that this place was a disaster, that this was profoundly dysfunctional, and in my hubris, I said I can surmount that. And I was completely wrong. And so I didn't do enough due diligence. I was too certain of myself. And I really, really regret that. It really, it brought me down emotionally in a pretty profound way, actually. And it was a miserable, really miserable experience. And it's on me. So that's a career regret that I have.
Okay, so before we go to the next one, I think the version of the no regrets philosophy that I was trying to defend a little bit would say, well, Dan, you can't regret that because if you hadn't had such a miserable job, you wouldn't have ended up writing such brilliant books about work. And you've landed where you are now. So you don't really regret that. It was a bad decision, but it's kind of worked out okay for you, right?
I think that's nonsense. Of course I regret it. I mean, the fact that I have an outcome right now that is satisfactory doesn't negate the fact that it was a bad decision, that I felt a sting from that bad decision, and that I've actually now appropriately processed it and used it as a forward lesson. If I simply said no regrets, it just led me to where I was, I would end up making the same mistake again. I would end up not learning a lesson from that regret. So I don't buy that.
I'm not going to keep selling it then.
Yeah,
okay. You're right. All right, let's talk about regret number 2 in the life of Dan Pink. Is there a parenting moment you regret?
Oh man. Yes. Okay. Yes, there is.
Are we going to solid age 4?
Yeah. Oh, I think you. Yeah, you might. Did you? I think you knew. I think I've told you this story. You knew this story.
I was so horrified by it that I had to ask you.
I know. Well, this is why you stopped asking me for parenting advice. So, yeah. So, okay. So this is bad. This is bad. I regret this. So my wife Jessica and I have 3 kids, 2 daughters and a son. And our son is the youngest. Our son is now 19 years old. He is a freshman at the Medill School of Journalism at Northwestern University. Go Cats. And he was 4 years old. He's a 4-year-old boy. And at one point, he was sitting in the backseat of our car, and he was just screaming and yelling and being a complete pain. And I was like at the end of my rope. Like we had these 3 little kids, and I'm busy, and I got all this work, and I'm behind on everything. And we're probably like going to the grocery store, and then we have to drop people off at a swim meet, and it's just like one of those chaotic parental moments, and beautiful little Saul is in the back seat screaming just at the top of his lungs, and I just can't freaking stand it. It's gonna drive me nuts. So I look back and I say, listen, if you know that you're in a bad parenting moment when you begin with listen, right? Listen, if you don't shut up, I'm gonna pull this car over to the side of the road and put you on the sidewalk, okay? Because I've completely lost it, all right? So he yells louder because he's smart. And then I'm in a bind here because I've now made a promise that like I need to maintain my credibility. So I pulled the car over to the side of the road on Albemarle Street. I know exactly the corner on Albemarle Street in Northwest Washington, D.C. And I took our little guy and I put him on the sidewalk and I started driving away. And he started screaming. He was so scared. And I got about 20 yards, and I felt the spear of regret and pain. And I went back and I was like, wow, that was not a shining moment in your life. So I really, really regret that.
What was the parenting lesson you took from that?
The parenting lesson I think that the parenting lesson that I took first of all, I think there's a healthy way to process that, which is at some level to forgive myself because I'm not the only parent who's lost it. Every parent on this call has lost it at some point. The second thing is that I'm disclosing it, and even though it's sort of painful for me to talk about, there is a sense-making function when I begin talking about it in a way. But I think the parenting moment is some people are 4. I think that's the lesson. And that like sometimes 4-year-olds just yell, and you're better off just ignoring rather than thinking of it as some kind of high stakes nuclear armament negotiation where if you don't deliver on your threat, you've compromised your integrity and your power.
Valid. I do have to say, though, I'm not sure I can forgive you for that one. So maybe we should check this out.
Our son has. I think our son has forgiven me because he's a very kind guy.
Okay, good. I'm relieved. All right. Regret number 3.
Yes.
This was actually anticipated by one of the advanced questions submitted. The question is there something you regret having written in a prior book?
It's interesting because, like, on a macro level, not that much. On a micro level, I will sometimes pick up a book of mine. I actually try to avoid it, and we'll read a sentence, and I'm like, oh man, why did you choose that word? What was wrong with you? And I get that kind of a wince. But that's not as massive a regret.
You know, a writer's writer when their biggest regret is the word choice.
Yeah, and also just like, oh, wait a second, that sentence, like I could have cut that sentence, or that sentence could have been in the other one. I was always taken when I was a college student, and I was sort of into studying poetry, but almost in a mathematical way, sort of deconstructing almost the mathematics of poems and things like that. I took a course in writing poetry, one course in writing poetry. And the professor, he's passed away, actually a famous South African poet, his name is Dennis Brutus, told me that he would give me an A- in the class writing poetry if I promised never to write poetry again. But in the deconstruct, I remember there's another professor, Lawrence Lipking, telling us about a W.H. Auden, who would go into bookshops and look at his poems of books and then start like marking them up. And I'm like, oh, okay. That's sort of my role model there. So I can't pick up anything I've written before and not want to mark it up.
Oof. Well, I'm glad you took the A-.
How about you? Do you ever look back and want to just rewrite something you've written?
Oh, constantly, which is why I try to only reread when I'm in a learning mode to begin with, to say, all right, is there something I can learn for the current book I'm writing, as opposed to pulling out the hair that I've already lost, trying to rewrite something that I can't gain anything from.
Yeah.
So I thought it would be interesting to hear about some of your regrets, just as a way for us to get to know you better. But also, I figured we'd pick up some nuggets around how to process regret, and you've already given us a few. Before we go into more depth on that, can you just break down the major types of regret? I thought you had this beautiful metaphor in the book about regret being the photographic negative of a good life, and I just thought that was profound. And understanding what are the different images we should be looking to reverse, I think is probably helpful for the audience.
Yeah. So let me answer that very simple and straightforward question with a long and discursive setting of the context, which is this. So in this book, I did 2 different pieces of research of my own. One of them was a big public opinion survey to try to get at American attitudes about regret. And we found some interesting stuff there. And the other was a qualitative piece of research where I just collected regrets from 16,000 people in 105 countries. We're actually at way over 17,000 now. So this giant thing of regrets. And the reason I did that is that I wanted to understand what people regretted. So in the quantitative survey, I had people list their regret and then put them into a category. Family, just as you did, Adam. What's a career regret? What's a parenting regret? What's a romance regret? And because I felt like that answer that had been given so far was unsatisfactory, and I would provide the answer in my quantitative piece of research. And because everybody else had said, oh, people regret a lot of things. And I found out in this pretty, I think, good piece of quantitative research that people regret a lot of things. I found out basically the same thing. Then when I looked at these qualitative responses, this chorus of these regrets would come into this office every single day, and I would go into my Qualtrics database and read a regret and read more regrets and read more regrets. And what I discovered is that beneath the domains of our lives, there was a deep structure of regret. And let me just make that plain. I'll give you an example of that. So I found around the world, people kept regretting the same 4 things. They had the same 4 regrets over and over and over. And the domain of life didn't matter. Let me make this concrete, as I said. that's when we were talking. I don't know. I'm talking a lot about college. So I have so many Americans in this database who went to college and regret not studying abroad. It's amazing to me how many is that. Do you have that regret, Adam?
Oh, it's the first regret I think of from college.
That's so interesting because I did an interview yesterday with another like very talented guy, very talented, accomplished guy, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I so regret." Okay, so first of all, so that's a regret. So that's an education regret. Also, for the many entrepreneurs watching on Fan, it's also a business idea. I'm telling you, if you can do a business, a travel agency of some kind that targets people like Adam, who regret not studying abroad and now have money in their pocket to actually do something super cool. So that's an education regret. I also have a lot of regrets, career regrets, that are like, I stayed at this lackluster job, and what I always wanted to do was start my own business. I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I wanted to go out on my own, but I never had the guts to do it. That's a career regret. Meanwhile, it's amazing, Adam. Literally hundreds of regrets that go like this. If it's the same construction. X years ago, there was a man/woman whom I really liked. I wanted to ask him, her out. I was too chicken to ask him, her out, and I've regretted it ever since. So that's a romance regret. But to me, those three are all the same regret. It's the regret of, if only I'd taken the chance. You're at a juncture, no matter what the domain of life, you're at a juncture. You can play it safe or take the chance. And overwhelmingly, people regret not taking the chance. I have people in the database who regret taking a chance, who say, "Oh, I took a chance and it didn't work out." And they are less agitated than the people who didn't take the chance. So one of the regrets is boldness regrets, if only I'd taken the chance. Let me quickly tell you the other three. Another one are what I call foundation regrets. Foundation regrets are, if only I'd done the work. These are people who regret smoking, not taking care of their health, not saving money, not working hard enough in school. Small decisions that compromise the stability of their later lives. Third category, moral regrets. A small category, but fascinating. These are people, again, you're at a juncture. You can do the right thing or do the wrong thing. People do the wrong thing, and not everybody, but a heck of a lot of them regret it. So I have the number of bullying regrets I have is breathtaking. The number of, maybe I'm naive, the number of regrets about marital infidelity are amazing to me. And then finally, our connection regrets. And those are when you have a relationship that was intact or should have been intact, and it comes apart. And they usually come apart in these deeply undramatic ways. And nobody wants to reach out. And so they drift further apart, and people feel that gnawing sense of regret. So those are the four core regrets. So I'll stop there and let you follow up. And I found over and over again, those are the regrets that people had, irrespective of the domain of life. And it was fascinating how little variation there was in nationality, seemingly in gender, in a little bit of variation in age, but there's sort of a kind of a universality of all these four regrets.
So as people process those four domains of regret, I think when they say no regrets, what they're trying to do is keep the learning but get rid of the pain, right? Like when I think about regrets, I think I want to treat that the same way as a stupid decision someone else made, right? Where I read about it, I learn the lesson from it, but it doesn't hurt. Is that feasible from the research you've done? Is it something we should aspire to, or do we need the pain in order to get the lesson?
I think it's a great question. And I'm not certain what the answer is, but my hypothesis, my sort of like the preponderance of evidence, to me at least, suggests that if you want the instruction, you got to have the pain. And this is one reason. And so we want the instruction, but we don't want the pain. And I don't think you can get that. I think you need that. I think you need that pain. There is some evidence, a couple of interesting papers showing that experiencing vicarious regret can lead you in that way. But I think in general you need the pain. And this is the thing that I keep coming back to, which is that especially in America, no one teaches us how to deal with negative emotions. And when we have negative emotions, we think that somehow there's something wrong with us because everybody else is so positive, and you're supposed to be positive. So am I weak? Am I broken? Is there something wrong with me? And we need to instruct people how to deal with negative emotions. That is, pain That stab of negativity is a signal. And so you can't ignore it and you can't wallow in it. You have to confront it. And one of the things that bugs me really deeply is this philosophy of no regrets. I never look back because I'm a man or woman of courage. That's bullshit. I mean, forgive me, but no regrets isn't a sign of courage. What's courageous is is dealing with the pain, responding to the pain, and confronting your regrets dead on and doing something about them. That's what courage is.
You write about a few different ways of doing that, and I think my personal favorite one is self-distancing. I was just reading a study yesterday, actually, by Helgeson and Berman. Actually, I think it was 4 studies, and they basically looked at the question of if we can disconnect your current self from your past self, is it easier for you to acknowledge your mistakes and then potentially grow from them? And I've found this immensely helpful in my own life to look at decisions I've regretted or been embarrassed by and say like, oh, like that's not me. That was dumber, less mature, some version of me. And it no longer hurts the same way, but the lesson still exists. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that as a technique for self-distancing versus talking to yourself in the third person, which I quite enjoyed seeing you do.
I like that, and Daniel Pink loves talking to himself and about himself in the third person, and I'm actually kind of convinced on the I actually like some of that self-distancing through the third person, but that's a really interesting technique, Adam. I actually don't know that, and I think what it does is it gets at your earlier question in a way of how do you get the lesson without the pain, and the way you get the lesson without the pain is that you think of yourself as somebody, old Adam, former Adam, as a different person. In a way, it reminds me a little bit of some of that research showing that that people don't save for retirement because they think that future Adam is a different person than current Adam. So why should current Adam give any money to future Adam? Future Adam's stealing from me. But then when you show them images of future Adam that's current Adam with software that ages their face, they're like, oh my God, I got to take care of Adam. So I think it's an interesting technique. I'm for any kind of self-distancing because, as you know, but as many of the folks on here might not, we are terrible at solving our own problems. We come at our own problems, particularly something emotionally charged like regret, like scuba divers, like we're in it and we want to be oceanographers and whatever you can do to be an oceanographer. So if you can look backward and say, if I look backward and say, like, I have regrets about kindness when I was younger. So, that was old Dan. Like, young Dan was unkind, and wow, what a jerk he was. But I'm sure glad I'm not like young Dan. It's like in Highlights magazine. It's goofus and gallant. Like, young Dan was goofus, but I'm gallant, and so I'm going to do the right thing. But you can also do things like you can self-distance through words. So if you're trying to extract a lesson or trying to figure out what to do next, instead of saying, what should I do? Truly, you can say, what should Dan do? You can do things like do the other kind of time travel and go forward in time and look back on the regret. You can do the old Andy Grove technique, which is particularly for business things, which is Andy Grove, the former CEO of Intel, who said, okay, you're making a decision. What would my successor do? If somebody came in today, what would she do if she replaced me? You can do things like pretend you're looking at your regret as like a thing and examine it and say, what lesson do you learn? And then the other thing on the distancing is, which I think is probably the best. I don't know. Tell me what you think of this. I think it's like one of the best decision-making heuristics around, which is, what would you tell your best friend to do? If you're trying to make a decision, ask yourself, what do you tell your best friend to do? And so those kinds of techniques, I think, are really useful in extracting lessons.
Agreed, especially because the advice you give to others is generally what you need to take for yourself if you were only listening.
Well said. I mean, I think that's generally true. And what I found is if you give people that decision-making tool, what would you tell your best friend to do? They know instantly. They stop deliberating. They stop hemming and hawing. Well, no, I tell Marlene to dump that guy.
So why do we need other techniques then? I think there's such a great library of self-distancing tools. We could almost stop there, but you talk about others like self-compassion. When are others relevant?
Well, I actually think that self-compassion is relevant too, and I'm curious what you think of this. I didn't know very much about this research on self-compassion, and I think part of it was that, forgive me, is that the very phrase itself sounded a little gooey to me, and then I looked at it, I'm actually kind of persuaded by it, and the reason for that is it's similar to the self-distancing. Is that I'll give you an example from my own life. So when I run, until very recently, and I'm tired, I'm trying to exhort myself, I talk to myself. Now I talk to myself in the third person, but I talk to myself in a brutally cruel way. You know, and I would never talk to anybody else like that. And a lot of times when we have failures, mistakes, missteps, regrets, we talk to ourselves in that very cruel way. So self-compassion says, treat yourself with kindness rather than contempt. It says, look at, to some extent, it says, Kristen Neff, who did a lot of this work, doesn't say this explicitly, but it sort of says, you're not that special. Like, you may feel bad, but believe me, you're not the only person with a kindness to regret. You're not the only person with a parent regret. That's part of the human condition. And also, it's not definitional of who you are. It's a moment. And so I find that technique very, very useful. And I actually think that, I've been thinking a lot about some of the mental health problems that especially teenagers are having in this COVID moment. And I actually think that self-compassion is a way around that a lot of times people look around, they've been fed this bill of goods about positivity, and they think that they're the only ones who feel bad, and therefore they should treat themselves with contempt rather than with kindness. And it's a huge mistake. And there's a lot of triangulation here. It's like, I don't want people to ignore their regrets or wallow in them. I want them to think about them. And with self-compassion, it's like, I don't want people to go crazy on self-esteem. There's some downsides to self-esteem, but on self-criticism, there's not a lot of value in self-criticism either. You're better off treating yourself with self-compassion. And I
think that suggests that we need to take a quick moment to say to all the teenagers listening right now, it's not just you. Yesterday's Wordle was very hard. So I want to talk about somebody who could have really benefited from these techniques and from your expertise. I hope he's benefiting from them right now. His name is Bruce. And Bruce is the first character in a Dan Pink book who has ever broken my heart. I cannot get over this guy.
Interesting.
It's devastating. And it's, I wonder if you could tell the story and
Sure.
Guide us through what Bruce ought to do at this point.
Bruce is a tough one. And I talked to Bruce many times, and Bruce asked me, what's interesting is, Bruce asked me not to use his last name, but Bruce lives in Spokane. He's 62 years old, but he asked me not to use his last name. What's interesting, I think, as a small side note, is I had a lot of people disclosing things about themselves that were often sort of unpleasant or painful, and there were only two people who didn't want me to use their names. I have people talking about infidelity, using their real names. I have people, but Bruce didn't want me to use his name. So here's the Bruce story. It is kind of poignant. So he graduated from college in like the early 80s, around there. He graduated from college. He goes to Europe to work on a farm in Sweden. On one of his final few days in Europe, he's traveling on a train. The train is going northward through France, and he's sitting there. And there's a seat open next to him. And the train stops, and this young woman about his age comes on. She's Belgian. She's working as an au pair in France. She sits down next to him. She just randomly takes the seat next to him. And they start talking. They're speaking in English because his French isn't very good. Her English is decent. And they start laughing. And they start playing word games. Hangman, not Wordle, because Wordle hadn't been invented yet. And it's a very innocent pre-internet age. And then they start holding hands. And then they start leaning into each other. And Bruce said, I've never felt that way about a person ever before. And the train's rumbling along, and they finally gets to Belgium where she lives. And she says, this is my stop. I got to get off the train. And Bruce is like, I'll go with you. And she says, no, my father will kill me. It's like, And it's this frenzied situation, and he doesn't know what to do. And so he madly writes his mother's mailing address. Remember, there's no internet. Writes his mother's mailing address on a strip of paper, gives it to her. They kiss. She gets off the train. And 40 years later, Bruce fills out the World Regret Survey and says, I never got off. I've always regretted never getting off that train. 40 years later, Bruce is married. not happily. And I didn't go to check to see whether there's another regret in there from Spokane from a woman saying, my big regret is that I married Bruce. But and he has just been bothered by this the whole time because and the reason for that is that I think there are two reasons. One, he's in an unfulfilling marriage. And this is a reminder of that. And two, he has that what if question that has been nagging at him for 40 years. And I actually, in talking to him for several times, I don't think that Bruce necessarily thinks like that would have changed his life. That it could have been, oh my God, like, I got kicked out of, I ended up sleeping on the street in Belgium, or this woman turned out to be not my not anybody who I liked or whatever, he doesn't have fantasies about a totally different course of his life. What he wonders is what if, and why didn't he take that risk at that moment when he had absolutely nothing to lose?
I think that speaks to something that neuroscientists have found, which is that often it's, especially for anxious people, uncertainty is worse than bad news.
Oh, interesting.
And in this case, right, you're saying it's the not knowing that hurts him so much. But I was struck by the counterfactuals here, that he's much more in the if only camp than what you call the at least camp, right? Like he's saying, well, I wish I had gone for it. He's not saying like it's a good thing that I have children with my partner. He's not saying it's a good thing that Sandra could have been an axe murderer. Like I avoided that possible future. So how do we move from the if onlys to the at least?
Well, I mean, I think that he can do that downward counterfactual and say, well, at least I have these two great kids. At least I've been able to build. He's a successful guy. I don't want to say what he does for a living, but he's professionally he's pretty successful. At least I have this. At least I have this great career. But I'm not sure whether that is really the ultimate lesson for Bruce. I think the ultimate lesson for Bruce is at age 62, when you still have some mileage ahead of you, is that the next time in any domain, I don't mean romance, take the chance. I think what Bruce laments is not being bold. He had a moment in his life when he had the opportunity to do something incredibly bold that, again, I don't want to get gooey here, but that at some level his heart was telling him to do, and there was no downside to it, and he chickened out, and that really bugs him. And I think the lesson that Bruce should extract for this, why has this been bothering you for 40 years? I think part of it is that he is missing a connection with his partner, but I think the other part of it is that he felt he hasn't lived a life of boldness, and that's a reminder of that. And one of the things that comes out in this photographic negative, why do we want boldness? Why do we prize boldness? Because all of us recognize at some level, we're only here for a short amount of time. So we want to do something. We want to learn. We want to grow. We want to lead psychologically rich lives. And I can see being at age 62 and saying, God dang it, I haven't stepped up. I haven't been bold. And I hope that Bruce takes that lesson from it. Instead, I mean, he might. What he also did, and this is the interesting thing about getting people as a writer to talk about their regrets, is that the story kept changing on me. Because I would have these conversations with people about their regret, and then I'd get an email like a week later, guess what I did? And I'm like, what? And I'm like, come on, I just wrote it. You can't change the story on me here. So Bruce started, oh my gosh. Bruce realized that he had kept an artifact of her because she had actually sent him a letter subsequently, but it was kind of weird. And he thought he had thrown it away, and then he looked, and he had saved this letter all this time. He started, and Bruce is like the most down-to-earth, sane, level-headed fellow you could possibly imagine. You does not have the whiff of desperation at all. And yet he decided to start posting notices in Craigslist Paris looking for this woman because that what if is still nagging at him. And I think what's ultimately nagging at him is that at age 62, he looks at his life and he feels like, I haven't fully taken the chance, and I don't have forever, and I want to lead a rich life.
Well, that is a good segue to the lightning round I want to do before we go to some more questions. So lightning round ground rules, you can go between one word and one sentence, and you can only skip one. Ready?
Okay, one word. I didn't agree to these rules, but I will.
No, but I'm telling you them now.
Okay, there we go. So you're imposing these rules on me, and it's one word, between one word and one sentence, and I'm allowed to skip one. Okay.
Correct. All right. Number one, who's a hero of yours that you regret not meeting?
Nelson Mandela. I'm in
Easy.
awe of what Nelson Mandela. Okay, sorry.
What's a piece of advice you regret following?
I mean, I hate to be cliche here, but go to law school so you have something to fall back on.
What about advice you regret giving?
Advice I regret giving. I won't go. It's one sentence. I once suggested that someone ask for a raise, and when she went in to ask for a raise, they fired her.
Ooh. Ouch. I hope you hired her.
It was. I think the writing was on the wall anyway. So, oops, sorry. I've expanded my.
All good.
I'm trying to follow the grant rules here.
I'm breaking my own rules. Okay. I don't want to spoil what's in the book, but knowing what you know now, if you had the choice to be a silver medalist or a bronze medalist, which would you choose?
Knowing what I know now, I would choose the silver. What we see in a pile of research is that bronze medalists are happiest. Bronze medalists are happier because they say, at least I got a medal, and silver medalists are surprisingly unhappy because they say, if only I'd kicked harder, I'd have a gold. Watch this, young men and women on the Olympic podiums from China, and you'll see that overwhelmingly, gold medalists are beaming, bronze medalists are beaming, silver medalists, who are the second best in the world, are not beaming.
And you anticipated my final lightning round question, which is, what is the most important tip that we haven't covered that you would give to the poor silver medalist who is unhappy about not winning?
Decide whether you want to compete again. And if you do, draw a lesson from what you could do better. If you decide that you don't want to compete again, celebrate the fact that hang your silver medal in a place of prominence, and celebrate the fact that you are an Olympic medalist, and that puts you in rarefied company.
Love it. Okay, now I'm going to give you sentence freedom again. Tell us about a regret circle.
So a regret circle is a pretty interesting idea where you gather a group of people and you share your regrets. So let's say you get 5 people and you go around and each person shares their regret. So you could say, if only I had followed my dream and studied painting rather than accounting, I'd be happier now. And you go around, you share your regret, and then the other 4 people help you through this process where you treat yourself with some kindness, you disclose it to make sense of it, and they help you extract a lesson from it. And I like this idea because what I'm trying to do here, Adam, is sort of normalize and destigmatize regret. We should be talking about this. And we're making an error of pluralistic ignorance by saying that, I want to talk about it and I'm comfortable talking about it, but no one else does. And I think that it's healthier for us to talk about these regrets. And there's a lot of there's a lot to be said for just mere disclosure in taking this blobby emotion that we have, this blobby negative emotion, converting it into words, either spoken or written, and that I think that can defang it.
Well, I didn't realize this until I read the book, but I've been doing a version of the regret circle in the classroom for years, where when I teach escalation of commitment to a losing course of action, I have students share a decision that they wish they had pulled the plug on. And I will never forget the year where a student said, I stayed in this relationship I'm currently in too long, forgetting that his girlfriend was in the class. Exercise is now a pair share. And then I asked people to report out.
Yeah. So I bet he regrets that.
I think it was definitely a regret. So there was a regret of the way that he shared his regrets.
Right.
Meta regret. So putting some of this in the context of something that we're all witnessing right now, the Great Resignation.
Yeah.
I have a sneaking suspicion that in about a year we're going to see the Great Regret. I just read a study of the largest and most rigorous of its kind of over 5,000 people in Australia. This is Sanz and Nielsen a couple months ago, voluntarily quit their jobs because they were dissatisfied. And on average, it took them over a year to recover their baseline level of satisfaction from the job they didn't like. And I think some of that is the grass is greener in the data. Some of it is it takes a while to feel like you belong and you're included in the new workplace. And then some of that is also, I think, work family disruption and, some kind of, I made my family move, or now my schedule is different and it's wreaked havoc on our home life. But I wondered if you could reflect a little bit about when should you leave your job and how do you do it in a way that you don't regret it?
I don't think I wish there were an algorithm for that. And I don't think that there is. I think that some of what you're seeing there could be, and I haven't read that paper. I think some of it could be that second point that you made, which is the barriers to belonging when a lot of work is remote. And so you take this job feeling like it's going to be better. And you don't build that sense of affinity you have because all your colleagues are on Zoom. What's more is that some of it might be a misattribution of what's bothering you. It could be that not only that you don't like your job, but it could be that just the context of your life is really bad because it's COVID, and you think that making this change will change everything, when in fact everything else remains more or less constant, and the only thing that changes is your job. I actually think that part of the Great Resignation, though, could be fueled by regrets of boldness, where people feel like I'm just guessing here, but I feel like the whole world of COVID for 2 years there's been at least the specter of mortality. We haven't necessarily been thinking about it consciously all the time, but it's been in the air. And I think that has a kind of a forcing function for people of like, they're sort of sequestered in their homes often, so they have time to reflect. They look backward and regret not being bold enough. They see the sense of mortality and they say, I got to do something. I got to do something. Now they could end up regretting it. And the other thing that could happen, which you often see, as you know, is that you basically have over time you just have a return to the set point, and people end up at the same level of satisfaction they were before. But I think some of it is our regrets about boldness. That comes out a lot in the qualitative research.
Well, that goes to another question that I was thinking about, which is something that you, I think, spent less time in this book than some of your others, which is the why now question. What's going on in the world that means we have to think about regret? And actually, one of the questions submitted in advance from Trish also touched on this, which is what is it about regret that forces us to think about it now and talk about it now? So COVID is, I think, part of the landscape. Are there other forces that make this a more important emotion or a more neglected emotion than it should be?
Well, that's a great question, and I think that and you're absolutely right that I didn't fully reckon with that. I think that COVID does make this a more urgent question right now because people have been reflecting. I think the other thing that makes it an urgent question is seeming this inexorable rise in mental health problems. And I think that a big part of it has to do with people not being instructed in how to deal with negative emotions. And I think that's particularly true with young people. I think at some level you get people who are debilitated by it, and some people who actually overly medicalize it. And it's like what we need to do is we need to instruct people to deal with this. I mean, I don't want to be talking out of school, but this book is going to be a freshman read at a university for that very in the fall for that very reason, because you have these 18-year-olds and 19-year-olds and they hit with a negative emotion and they don't know what to do. And they need some instruction on how to do that. They need the permission to forgive themselves for that, and they need the tools to disclose and self-distance and draw lessons from it. And so I think that it has that kind of urgency to it too. But honestly, Adam, I think the bigger thing for me is that I don't know if I would have written this book 20 years ago. I don't think I had the perspective. I don't think I had the mileage on me. I think old Dan wasn't smart enough to write this. And I think, and I think probably 78-year-old Dan is going to look back and say, oh my God, Dan of 2022 is a freaking idiot. What kind of terrible book is this? Look at that sentence he wrote.
But Dan of 2022 would say back, but it's the best book I could have written at the time.
When Dan of 2022 is feeling well-adjusted, he will say that.
He should say that if he reads his own book.
At other moments, Dan of 22 is going to say, "Oh, you might be right. Maybe I should quit the business. Maybe I should just Tom Brady this whole writing thing."
Well, as I think Tom Bradying still means being the GOAT for more than 2 decades, not retiring, right?
Yeah. Although I've been writing books for about as long as Tom Brady's been playing football.
Luckily, those skills did not decay as quickly. And may even improve over time.
Well, just you wait, young man. You'll see.
Well, I'll look forward to your feedback on that in a few years. But before I turn it back over to Lonnie to go through some more audience questions, let me just ask you one closing question, which is, can I overdo regret? Is it possible that I learned too many lessons or I end up becoming too bold? For example, because I've been wallowing in all the chances I didn't take. And how do I know when I found the sweet spot?
Yeah, I think that it's possible. I think that it's possible to do that. But I have to say on that particular issue, there was almost nobody in the 17,000 who regretted being too bold. I mean, that to me is a problem that doesn't need solving. I think the question can become, do you become, if you lose the capacity to reckon with your regrets, you can spin into rumination, and that's devastating. And at the same time, when you anticipate your regrets, you can spend a lot of time trying to regret and minimize regrets about the wrong things. So you should, and so you shouldn't be. So for instance, I think it's pretty clear that if you're trying to decide right now, should I buy a blue car or a gray car? And you start saying, well, in 5 years, what am I going to regret more? You're not going to care in 5 years. I can almost guarantee that. What you are going to care about is, depending on where you are in your life, did you build a stable foundation for yourself? Did you take an appropriate risk? Did you do the right thing? Did you build connections with people and build a life that is made whole by the love and care of other people? Those are the things you're going to regret. So I think you can't overdo it, both in fastening on things for too long and then also for trying to anticipate regrets over the wrong thing.
Excellent. Well, I am extremely confident that no one with us tonight will regret reading this book. So
thank you.
I highly recommend that you all go through it and apply it to your lives. Lonnie, back over to you.
What fabulousness on the screen. I've just been smiling and chuckling. Everyone's just loving it in the Q&A, and I know people are getting so much great value. As predicted, we had over 100 questions submitted on the Zoom registration form. Tonight, we're up close to 50 questions during the event. We're obviously not going to get to any of them, which brings me to my point, which is, if you buy, Anne-Marie, go ahead and please put the link one more time in chat. If you have not had chat open up chat. We've been placing in links to buy Dan's book because at 8:05, we're going to open up a Zoom meeting where you can ask all 150 questions at that Zoom meeting yourself on screen with Dan. He'll answer your questions. It's a great opportunity. We're never going to get to everybody's questions and comments, but the after hours, which we're starting just very shortly, is going to be just such a great opportunity to continue the conversation. So I'm now going to flip to just a couple of these. Adam, also, please, I want to just say thank you so much. You're so, obviously you're great as a presenter. You're just so right there as an interviewer too. Thank you so much for your service tonight. Very much appreciate it. I'm going to start with one quick observation from Negar. He says, you're getting old when watching a live webinar of Adam Grant and Daniel Pink talking about regret is as exciting as my first time going to a Spice Girls concert. Thank you for this.
Yep. All right.
No, I think he means that.
I think it's great, and I'm just glad that he went to a Spice Girls concert, because one of my favorite regrets in here is somebody, I don't know if I can pull it out right away, is somebody who says she regrets not going to a Prince concert because it was a school night, and she finally realized there are plenty of school nights but not many Prince concerts.
That's true. clearly. Lynn asks, and this question got asked a couple different times in different ways, so I'll go with Lynn because it was the most recent. Do you see a difference between men and women and how they handle regret, or maybe, and then alternately, the regrets differ by gender between men and women?
Okay. So so in my own research, I didn't explore this one aspect of it. But what I saw in the quantitative research is that in certain of the surface domains, you had men were slightly more likely to have career regrets, women were slightly more likely to have family regrets, but not anything massive. There's other research, not my own research, that shows, and I'm going to simplify for the sake of time, that when it comes to sexual regrets, there are differences. And the TLDR is that men regret the people they didn't sleep with, and women regret the people they did sleep with.
Sorry. That's kind of funny.
Yeah,
say
yeah.
More. No, say more. No.
Well, I mean, this is. I'm oversimplifying, but not by a lot. So there is a footnote that in the book, later in the book, that makes that case. I wish I had asked questions about sexual regrets, in part so I could have a chapter called "Sexual Regrets" when people were looking at the table of contents.
From Liz Gerber, who, let's just have another round of applause for Liz Gerber, just because. She says, Dan mentioned the role of power when sharing his story about his son. Could Dan speak more broadly to the role of power and regrets?
Huh, that's interesting. So,
of course it's interesting. It's Liz Gerber.
Yeah. I think it's super interesting. A super interesting question. I haven't thought a lot about that, and I'm not sure I have an answer as intelligent as Liz's question, but that won't stop me from giving an answer. One of the things about regret that makes regret is a sense of agency, and because it's your fault. And I think people with power often feel a greater sense of agency, and so it's possible that they could experience greater regret because they have greater agency. That's just a guess. The other thing is that not everybody has agency. So when we look at these foundation regrets, I think that in some cases people should actually let themselves off the hook in a small way. So if you have somebody who regrets, I have a lot of people. One guy in the book, I'm 43 years old. I've never been able to save any money. And that's on him based on his story. But there are other people, in their late 30s or early 40s who haven't been able to save money. But if they went to college and they came out of college saddled with $150,000, $200,000 in debt, that lack of savings isn't totally on them. And so I think there might be a connection, Liz, to that between power and agency. One other thing, forgive me, is that in the quantitative research, we found this very interesting phenomenon that the more formal education you had, the more career regrets you had. And I think that's largely because people had more opportunities and therefore more foregone opportunities. So it's a great question.
Then I'm going to squeeze this one in, so this will be quasi lightning round, but I think it's interesting. Ann Sorensen is asking, if regret is a learning opportunity that can be meaningful and then positive for well-being, should we be concerned about the pursuit of perfectionism that occurs and continually wanting to do things better? Do you think that there is a line, fine or otherwise, that could cast rectifying and actioning regrets as negative?
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly there's a big difference between improvement and perfectionism. Perfectionism is completely debilitating. And so, one of the things that we have to get, I mean, this is sort of part of healthy functioning, is like we have to figure out, like, what do we have control over? What do we not have control over? Some perfectionism is basically seeking control over things you have no control over. Right. Some of perfectionism is simply is aspiring to a standard that is unachievable. When the desire for improvement turns into the obsession with perfectionism, that's obviously really dangerous. I don't really have, Adam, do you have a good sort of technique for stopping that?
I mean, the only one that I've found even remotely helpful is just to distinguish reflection and rumination. Rumination is when I cycle through the same thought over and over again. Reflection is when I gain a new insight, and if there hasn't been one in the last 10 minutes, it's time to move on.
Yeah. One other thing on this, I'll give you one super technique.
All right, we're at 8:01. Go ahead.
One super quick technique that I use myself, which is ironic given the timing here, is that Lorne. I say this to myself literally out loud sometimes. Lorne Michaels, the guy who created Saturday Night Live, said very famously once. He says, "We don't go on because we're ready. We go on because it's 11:30. And there are times that I say to myself, Dan, it's 11:30. And that technique has been useful for me to say, okay, you got to stop improving because you're never going to hit perfection, and just it's 11:30. The red light is on the camera. Let's put on a show.
Let's go. I love that. I'm going to write that down, actually. Thank you so much for that. Adam, again, we hope to see you in Fanland again. Let's not wait quite so long next time. We'd love to see you again. Dan, great night.